This video today has been produced by the SUAS Project with support from Teagasc, and what we're here to talk about is planting trees in the uplands. Now, when people think of trees in the uplands, we generally tend to think of thousands of acres of Sitka spruce, huge areas, nothing else, whereas what we're proposing here is something quite different, and this video aims to try and address that. What we want to look at is why would we plant trees in the uplands, then what type of trees, what species, where do we source them from, where do we plant them, what areas, and finally the practicalities of how do we plant them, how do we go out, do we need tree shelters, how do we protect them from deer and from sheep and so on. So I hope you take the time to watch the rest of this video, and I hope it will answer most of your queries.
We're here on a tributary of the River Dargle, and we've come up here to have a look at what gully woodland looks like in its more mature state. So behind me here you can see a nice downy birch and mountain ash, two of the typical species we find on our upland little rivers and streams. Behind us is a remnant of a natural woodland in our uplands along a watercourse. This is what we're trying to restore with the tree planting on the SUAS project along our watercourses in the commonages and upland farms. And these trees, obviously aesthetically, they look very beautiful in the landscape, but they're giving us a whole range of other benefits. They're helping to stabilise the soil, they're slowing the flow of water off the hill, they're providing shelter for livestock, they're providing habitat for a whole range of species, and they're also helping with cooling water temperatures in the actual streams in the uplands where we have populations of brown trout. So we're here on the slopes of Joust Mountain and War Hill, and this is a tributary of the River Dargle. So behind us here you can see there's some fragments of upland woodland along this stream, but you can see that it's only a little small isolated area, and we have this big gap here downstream, and then we're looking at another bit which is another isolated pocket. So the idea with the planting on the SUAS project would be to try and reconnect these areas and have a corridor along the river of woodland. So here we have mountain ash and downy birch. Downstream we have another species which is holly. The holly and the mountain ash have lovely bright red berries in the autumn. The birds are feeding on those and they're spreading them along the river. So a simple thing, even rather than planting a tree, would be to walk along the river, look for regeneration and protect it with a deer tube, and the birds will spread the trees as well. But the idea is to try and create a long linear corridor of woodland along the river in this landscape.
So here's an example of a naturally regenerated rowan or mountain ash tree. It was probably dropped here in bird droppings, and every year it tries to grow, but you can see once it gets to the level of the heather, it's getting browsed back by the sheep or by the deer. If you look back in here, you can see it's quite a developed stem. This tree could be 20 years, could be 15 or 20 years old, but every year it's just not being able to, its roots are established, but the shoots are not able to develop. So the trees we're planting in the uplands, they're all native Irish species, and they'd range from willow to rowan, birch, Scots pine. We get some holly as well, and some oak as well in the more sheltered areas. So as I say, they're all native trees, and we try and use native provenance. So the seed source the seed sources are Irish, and they normally come as bare rooted trees, where you see that the trees are the roots are bared like that, and they be delivered in these white co-extruded bags, which keeps the moisture in and the heat out. But these should always be kept in the shade if possible. So this is an oak tree. It's a sessile oak. There's two species of oak in Ireland. This is sessile oak, and these are the ones which would be used in the SUAS project. They're always planted in the dormant season, so they don't have leaves on, so we're planting in the winter time. This one is a birch tree. It's a downy birch. There's two species of birch in Ireland. We'd be using downy birch generally. It's kind of a redder or orange, more orange stem. And this one is a Scots pine. They generally come as smaller trees, and we wouldn't normally plant these in tubes, but we'll discuss that later on the other segment of the video. And again, bare rooted like this. So other species we would use, I don't have examples here, would be rowan for planting, and then normally we would expect willow and holly to seed themselves, but that would normally be in a situation with reduced grazing.
So we're here in the upper headwaters of the River Dargle, and we have a tributary here beside us, and we can see there's a few remnant trees along it, whereas in the wider landscape, when we look, there's actually almost no trees along the rest of the river. So we're trying to reconnect these little fragments of trees and little copses and little groups of trees with planting, and create a linear corridor. And in this landscape, where you see bracken, that's a good indication of where trees will grow successfully. So we're not talking about planting on the open hillside, on bog or on wet heath. We'd also be avoiding what are called flushes. So these are where little springs and little seeps rise off the mountain and flow down towards the river. And you'll know you're in a flush because it'll be wet and you'll feel the water under your feet. So we're avoiding wet areas, and we're avoiding any deep peat.
People will be wondering, where should they plant the trees? Where exactly, what kind of spacing there should be between the trees? So there's no real rules on this in terms of spacing. The trick is to follow the soil and to follow the vegetation that's suitable. For tree planting, in the SUAS project, we're recommending a pit planting method. So pit planting, you actually dig a hole or a small pit for the tree, like I'm doing here. You find your spot, and you dig out a hole. Just leave the sod on the side, and then the soil in the hole, you want to loosen up, just mix it up a bit, loosen it up nicely, so there's lots of air in there, and nice and loose for the roots to penetrate. Okay, so we get our tree. This one's a birch tree, and as I said before, it's bare rooted. Okay, so we're just going to sit it down in the middle of the hole, just nest it in, don't force it down any further than it needs to go, like that. Just sit it in nearly so it can stand itself. In the wind it's just going to blow a bit, and then we're just going to take some loose material off the sod and put it back in the hole, just around the roots, nice and loosely there. Okay, and then we'll just cut a slit in the sod. See that? See the slit in the sod like that? I'm going to put it in around the tree, back like that, and then you thread it in nice and firm. Okay, so you should be able to give the tree a good tug and can't come. Okay, so here's the root system. So when we're planting, we want to obviously make sure that the roots are underground and the stem is above ground, and the bit in between is called the root collar. And the root collar should be just flush with the ground, or the grass or the ground level. So when we plant this, we want this root collar just to be at the sod, just at the level of the sod. Okay, so and the other thing is we want the roots just to sit as they are, to sit naturally as they are in the soil. So we don't want to have to scrunch them up or push them one side or pull them out like that or anything. We just want them to sit exactly the way they grew in the nursery. Okay, so we have to think about that when we're digging our hole. I'm just going to loosen this soil again. I'm going to take a bit more of it out, keep it on the spade, it's handy. And if you can picture that there, it just sits in naturally the way it was. And I'm just going to loosely put that soil back in around. It'll sit there more or less, get a bit more soil in around. So in around the back. That's it. So and there's the root collar. Do you see it there? Just the root collar. And we're just going to put our tree back in. At this time we don't need a slit because the tree's found itself naturally on the edge of the pit. So I'm just going to place that back down. I'm going to tread it in. And there's our root collar. Do you see it just at the ground level there? Now, because of the deer pressure and the sheep grazing, we have to protect it with a tube. And the tube obviously has to be staked as well. The tree would be fine on its own without a stake, but the tube needs a stake to keep it up. So before we put the tube on, we'll drive the stake. Keep that down. So this is a 2-inch stake, and it's a 6-foot stake as well, and 2-inch. Okay. Normally we would use it on the upper side of the tree. We put it on the upper side of the tree, and somebody holds it straight if you can, and just tap it gently at first, down until it's good and firm. Maybe a bit further, and just drive it the last bit. Okay, so a sheep or a deer are not able to push it over. That's good and firm. And then coming back to the tube, there's a right end and a wrong end to the tube. So the top end of the tube is fluted. I don't know if you can see that. It's fluted, it's curled outwards a bit. That's so as when the tree is coming out of the tube, it doesn't get injured or rashed by the edge of the tube. So if we were to use the bottom up, see there's no fluting on that, and that's quite sharp and would cut into the edge of the tree and the bark of the tree and damage it and cause it to break. So always make sure that the tube is the fluted end up. So the other thing then is to make sure when we put the tube onto the tree that all the branches don't get broken or brushed downwards. We want them to stay in that upswept pattern. So the clip goes on, we guide the tree into it, and just as we pushing the tree down, we gather the branches like that. Just gather them in as the tube goes down so they stay upswept. Just gather them in, just gently, there's no hurry with it. Gather it in. And if you feel any opposition, then that means the branch is kind of working against you, so you need to pull it in. And then it should slip down quite easily. And just don't forget the top clip has to go over the stake as well. That's on. And then we'll go back down to make sure it's going down. Just these last branches are holding it, so they need to be swept up, and down it goes. Perfect. Nice and firm to the ground, so you can do the last bit, just pull it down like that and then tighten the clips. And often what we use is an extra cable tie to help with it, which we can thread in using the same holes as are provided on the tube, just as a reinforcement.
Hopefully this video has answered some of your queries and a lot of the questions you may have had. We would like to think that hopefully it might inspire and perhaps give some of you the confidence to go out and plant trees on your own upland areas.